Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you back to Soldier Speaks English. And once again, I've got Theo A-Mullis with me, who is a war correspondent, and he covers Ukraine on ground. So we'll welcome Theo, and we'll straight away go to brass tacks. Theo, we are hearing a lot of chatter about peace talks. We are hearing that President, the Ukrainian President Zelensky is willing to give away 20% of his country, but President Putin of Russia is still not convinced. And it is an unwinnable war. There is chatter, and in our previous program we did discuss that how after the Trump-Putin meeting things are changing, but then Trump, he's put the temperature up and he has asked his allies to take Russia seriously. I don't know that materialized or not, but there's all different kind of chatter going on, and the Russian naval ships are in English waters, and that was also reported. So a lot of aggressive posturing by Russia in response to peace initiative by NATO countries, by the European countries. So what's actually going on? Could you please cut through the chatter and all these news and the confusion and tell us what's exactly going on, please?
Yeah, so the other week, Trump decided that he was going to wade back into attempting to end the war in Ukraine after publicly having sort of moved on from it. And I question why he's immediately dived back into it. But he released this 28-point plan, which I'm not going to go into the full details of it. But it was very detrimental to Ukraine. It was more of a surrender. It almost looked copy-pasted from sort of a Russian wish list, which there are rumors circulating around that Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, who he's been going to quite a lot to reach out to the Russians. Of course, Witkoff is a man of he comes from real estate. He's got no diplomatic background at all. He was apparently, this isn't confirmed as far as I know, in talks with Kirill Dmitriev, one of Russia's finance guys, who was also involved in negotiations, and they may have come up with this plan together. But what's really interesting is that this 28-point plan was pretty brutal. It was de facto recognition of the territory Russia has seized, which is about 19% of Ukraine since 2014. A commitment to not joining NATO, a commitment to maintaining and reducing the size of the Ukrainian army, ceding further territory, which in 14 plus years of warfare, sorry, let me correct myself. Since 2014, the Russians have been unable to take this land. They've never held it, and they're demanding that be ceded. Limiting the size of the Ukrainian armed forces to around, I think it was 600,000 people, which would be a cut of about a third, give or take, of what it is now. Ukraine obviously is fighting an existential war. It's got an extremely large army. And the historical parallels of this plan, at least in terms of what we've seen in Europe before, are really significant. It mirrors very much what was forced upon Czechoslovakia in the 1930s, when they were forced by the Western Allies to cede land to Nazi Germany to avoid a war. And one of the major consequences of that is that it ceded the land where Czechoslovakia had all of their military defenses. And this situation is very similar. Russia wants to take land it's failed to take because it's part of what's called the fortress belt.
All
which
right.
is a line of fortifications across the east, which are very strong, and Russia's been unable to break through them. However, this plan was then rejected by the Russians, rejected by Ukraine, and rejected by Europe. So unworkable in every count. And now it's just been reported that this is from an American official, that Ukraine has agreed to a deal to end the war with Russia, with only, quote, minor details outstanding. This is as reported by CNN. What those minor details are, we don't know. What the deal is, we don't know. But Ukraine has agreed to ceasefire proposals from the Americans before. And it's usually, well, every time it's been the Russians that have rejected the Ukrainian-American proposal. And I expect that this is what we'll see here. The Russians, at least Vladimir Putin, still thinks that he can win this war. Bear in mind, when the Russian troops initially carried out the full-scale invasion in February 2022, the first wave of soldiers that went in that long convoy that got stuck, they not only packed their rifles and ammunition, they packed their dress uniforms. So their fancy showing off uniforms, expecting a parade through the capital. This is what Russia started this war to do. It was regime change and install a leader in Ukraine who'd be much more accepting of vassal status, such as Lukashenko in Belarus. And that's failed to the point where in the last 2 years, from 2024 to 2025, Russia has managed to seize a total of 1% of Ukrainian territory in 2 years, and at an enormous cost in lives. So the aim of rejecting a peace proposal, which gives them significant concessions, including phased sanctions relief, involvement in Ukraine's rebuilding with US-Russia partnerships, which seems quite bizarre. It accepts that some Russian frozen assets, Russia has about 270 billion in Europe, so 100 billion of that would be used to rebuild Ukraine, which is not nearly enough. Ukraine needs hundreds of billions to be rebuilt. And then they reject it, which is interesting. And we'll have to see why. But this new plan that's being reported on now, changes to the deal, we'll have to see what happens there. But Ukraine's red lines have always been no de jure recognition of any seizure of land. The world as a whole does not recognize Russia's seizure of Crimea. That took place way back in 2014. And it demands firm security guarantees, because without it, let's put this in a way that your average person may understand. Russia has, say you own a farm with 20 acres, give or take. Russia has come in, beaten you up. Russia's your neighbor. They've come and beaten you up, and they've stolen 4 acres of land. And they say, this is mine. And they continue to beat you up. They continue to throw stones and explosives at your house and hit your kids, all that sort of thing. And they're saying, we will stop if you give us 2 more acres and promise never to call your extended family if we do this again. Oh, and also we know you've got a son who can fight. You're going to have to send that son away and only keep the son who can't.
So is it true, Theo, that President Zelensky is willing to cede 20% territory of Ukraine to Russia? Is that true?
No, not de jure, so not by the letter of the law. The Ukrainians recognize that for either side, the large maneuver warfare that we saw in 2022, 2023 is basically impossible. Neither side has the armor capabilities to be able to move, and when armor does move, it gets swarmed by drones and destroyed. So, and the lines are now so set, other than in one area, a city called Pokrovsk, which the Russians have thrown, that's been their aim of 2025, is to take this city. And I say it's a city. I mean, it had a pre-war population of about 60,000. It's a town. And so far, they've been unable to take it. The situation there is very difficult for the Ukrainians, without a doubt, but it's very significant that the army that was the second largest, the second army of the world, has been unable to do anything it set out to do in its neighboring country, with which it shares thousands of miles of border. So, paired with all of this, we're seeing this sort of double-pronged strategy from the Ukrainians. I was speaking to General Ben Hodges the other week, and we were talking about the theory of victory. You're a military man, you understand the theory of victory. What are you going to set out to achieve, and how are you going to do it? Ukraine's theory of victory is to cripple Russia's ability to pay for this war. So it's targeting oil and gas infrastructure with missiles, which we've seen before. And the Western allies have also been putting heavy sanctions now on oil companies, forcing Russia to export less oil for less money. And this war is enormously expensive for Russia. And at the moment, they're paying for it essentially using their overdraft. And it's already being felt. I can never pronounce the name. I'm not going to try because I will fail. Russia's main tank factory.
Yeah.
They've just announced that they're going to cut workers. And that they're going to cut jobs.
So Theo, why in the world Putin not agreeing to a ceasefire, and he's showing this aggressive posture by sending naval ships to the English waters and constantly rejecting any kind of proposal? Briefly, could you explain that?
I think it comes down to psychology. That this man still thinks he can win, right? But the system that he has set up in his years of power in Russia is a trap that many totalitarian rulers fall into, and very bad bosses in your normal life. If you only accept good news, if you only promote people who tell you good news, eventually all you are told is lies.
All right.
And that's, I think, why he invaded in the first place. He believed the intelligence from the FSB. He believed his advisors. Then it was a very small circle of advisors that made this decision, that they would be met with bread and salt, the traditional way of greeting people in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, that the Ukrainian army would collapse, that they don't have the will to fight, all of this stuff. And obviously, he's been proven very, very wrong. But now he still thinks if he's still taking land, he can try to tire, not the Ukrainians necessarily, but certainly his aim is undermining support for Ukraine among its allies. And that's the big risk, because Ukraine, while it manufactures an enormous amount of its own military hardware, especially drones, still needs help, especially economic help. Things like what the Europeans are doing, that they're underwriting the hryvnia, the Ukrainian currency, and they are sending very, very vital systems. The Germans just sent their latest air defense systems to Ukraine, etc. And if you can undermine the support there, which is why they're doing things like sending drones over Poland, sabotaging Polish railways, sending these ships into or very, very close to British waters, and then they shot lasers. They wouldn't destroy the aircraft, but they shot lasers at British aircraft, allegedly attempting to blind the pilots, which is against the rules of armed conflict. You're not allowed to use lasers to try to blind people. All of this stuff is aimed at eroding support. And that's why, one of the reasons why Russia has invested so heavily into social media and into other media forms, especially in the rest of the world, to try to persuade people that Russia is a representative of multipolarity, of I hate the term, but I'm going to use it because it's understandable, of the global South. And
why do you hate it?
I hate it. I think it's slightly patronizing.
All right.
I think it lumps in so many different countries with different cultures and different ideas into one thing.
It's oversimplification and generalization, actually.
I agree, and I think it's similar to the way people say the West, whereas they just mean they mean the rich countries. And it ends with this mindset that some people have where they treat everything in geopolitics like you support one team in the football match or you support the other team instead of sticking to your values, which is really how you should approach it. So undermining support is their theory of victory, and I think he thinks he can do that. He thinks he can undermine support for Ukraine in fighting this imperialism to the point where the Ukrainians are unable to fight effectively back.
Putin thinks that, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So Theo, finally, tell me, if under the circumstances, I trust you what you're saying, and I can see what you're telling me, and I'm sure our audience can also see through that. All right, if somebody says it's an unwinnable war, fine, we'll take that argument. But it's not only unwinnable for Ukraine, it's also unwinnable for Russia at the same time. So under the circumstances, all right, is this a fair comment then, right?
It depends on how you define winnable. Russia's, and as you know, you're a military man.
You will drag on. Nobody will be a definitive winner in this war. So under the circumstances, do you think the peace proposal, the US peace proposal, is it a peace proposal or is it an instrument of surrender?
The initial proposal, I don't know what the new one is that they've apparently agreed to. The initial proposal is an instrument of surrender. It's a peace without justice. And the only thing that will result is that in 2030, 2035, we would see a renewed invasion of Ukraine.
So do you think the European alliance should agree to an instrument of surrender to Russia?
No, they rejected it.
All right.
They rejected it alongside the Ukrainians and the Russians.
All right. I agree. Russians have also. So what do you think is going to make peace is the logical way forward? Obviously, short of that is, in fact, if we don't achieve peace, the food prices and inflation will keep on rising. The disaster capitalists will keep on enjoying. They don't care if the peace is achieved or not. It is common people like me and you, and the majority, 99% of the world, who are concerned, that who do want peace in Ukraine and Russia and the rest of the world as well. But what are those conditions do you believe should be met to achieve peace, which would be acceptable to both Russia and Ukraine?
Ooh. Any peace must have security guarantees, firm security guarantees.
All right.
The decisions that Ukraine makes in its future, which organizations it wants to join, it has to be recognized that that's Ukraine's decision, and that no other country has the right to, by force of arms, change that. And me pushing for this, people say one has to recognize that no country is a paragon, and all have not stuck by what I am saying. Every single one, especially Britain and the United States. The invasion of Iraq was illegal. The invasion of Afghanistan is more up for question, but was also misguided, at least certainly in how and the attempted reconstruction was carried out. These countries have committed crimes, but I'm in a position where it's possible to call that out, and it's possible to do something about that. And I speak to people either in Russia or outside who are very much pro-Russia, and I say, is there anything that you can criticize about your nation in its history? And often they say no. But to get back to it, any peace has to come with security guarantees. The territory that Russia has managed to seize must not, in international law, be recognized, because then you open the floodgates to countries saying, well, we have this historical grievance over this patch of land, and we're bigger and we have a better army, so we're going to invade our neighbor and take it. You open the door to that being made acceptable, that being made the thing, which is what happened for much of human history, and much of human history is full of violent death. And there has to be reconstruction. Ukraine can't be allowed to. It needs help once this war is done. Otherwise, Ukraine is the breadbasket for so much of the world. And when the Russians were trying to sink grain ships that were leaving Ukraine, food prices skyrocketed across the entire of the African continent, across Europe, across Asia, because Ukraine is basically, when you go there, you realize why. The soil is black. It's fantastic soil, and it's flat. When you get out east past the Carpathians, it's a flat country, and it is fields of grain and sunflowers and everything. I mean, that's what their flag depicts.
Yeah, obviously. So it says Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, actually,
and Africa.
Yeah,
it exports enormous amounts of
Asia.
grain.
In Asia, even in Pakistan. Yeah. I still remember the chickpeas is it's like a staple food in Pakistan and India, and it used to be imported from Ukraine. I still remember that wheat. That's also a product of Ukraine. So the entire world is suffering because of this war, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And this war, it's imperialistic. It's an idea that we will seize land because we believe it to be ours, and we will do that by force. And the history of that is one of misery. I mean, the countries of our birth share this history.
Yeah.
And it is difficult to find somebody who will say that it was justified. Imperialism is criminality, and I implore everybody watching, take a look at what Russia has done in the past few years. And it is good to criticize what the Western nations have done, what Britain has done, what the United States has done. There's certainly, support for Israel in their occupation and massacres in Gaza, criminal. And it undermines everything that we allegedly stand for. But I would ask people to take a look at what Russia has done. In the invasion of Georgia, assassinations all over the world of dissidents, and the invasion of Ukraine. They still occupy land in Moldova, a country they don't even share a border with. Their actions in Syria, the massacres that they conducted in Aleppo, the use of chemical weapons, which is why when the when the new Syrian government swept in, they had support from Ukrainian forces. And take a look at what Russian private military companies like the Africa Corps are doing on the African continent. It's old school imperialism. They will come and they will say to the government, "We will provide you military training and security, but we want these gold mines."
So, Theo, do you think the United Kingdom's, the UK's defenses are capable enough to take on any sort of aggression from Russia?
On its own?
I mean, obviously, the UK is NATO's member, so NATO has to be there. So do you think NATO is ready to take on Russia?
Oh, yeah. No, NATO, if NATO's Air Force alone were to take on Russia as it stands, there wouldn't be a contest.
Right,
but that's a huge step up the escalatory ladder. Both parties, you've got 3 countries in NATO that are nuclear armed. Russia is nuclear armed. And there's a risk there. That's not to say limited wars between nuclear armed countries have happened, because they certainly have. You look between the USSR and the People's Republic of China, and India, Pakistan, limited conflict between nuclear armed countries. However, it's a massive step up the escalatory ladder that all of NATO would like to avoid. But Russia is constantly pushing and constantly testing. And
do you
I
believe
think
Russia...
the response should be a bit more firm.
Yeah, all right. I agree with that. Do you believe Russia is doing it all on its own? Putin is just doing it all its own because of the nepotism, the system of nepotism, which has brought the yes man to top, or it's China behind all this fiasco, because Chinese art of war teaches them not to fight a war to win it. You need to win a war without fighting. So that's
that's a direct quote. Also, know your enemy.
Know your enemy. Yeah, of course.
And
so do you believe the Chinese are behind this Russian aggression?
Well, this is something I spoke with General Petraeus about, and the Chinese, they don't supply arms directly to Russia. They do supply like the IKEA flat pack, right? So they're supplying, the engine, the fin, the shell, the guidance systems. I mean, I saw a video recently, and it come from a downed Russian drone, the Geran, and it showed that was saved on its camera an image from a Chinese highway, and it was highlighting the vehicles. So it was part of that system. Excuse me. But I think the Chinese are watching very, very closely what's happening. They're providing a level of support to Russia because it distracts the United States and it distracts Europe, because they have their own spit of land that they want back in Taiwan. But, and this is a big but, during the period of European imperialism in China, the Russians took swathes of land in Siberia. And if you think the Chinese have forgotten about that, I would ask you to think again. There's a very large freshwater lake in Russia that's not too far from China, Lake Baikal. And the Chinese are about righting the wrongs of the century of humiliation at the moment, in their eyes, and becoming, again, putting history back to its normal place. In the Chinese perception of China as a civilization, it's the Middle Kingdom or it's all under heaven, the two sort of names. And moving against Taiwan is all a part of reclaiming that. And if they succeed at that, well, they're going to look to Russia. So a weakened Russia is actually good for them. They're not friends. China is certainly using Russia at the moment, and Russia is absolutely the weaker partner.
So, Theo, what would you say to the people here in the West, in the UK, or in the US, uh, who romanticize Putin's aggression?
Grow up. It hits very differently when the shaheeds when the drones are overhead. I would say that take a moment. To the people in the United Kingdom and US, think what your grandfather would have thought of you romanticizing the imperialistic aggression of a dictator. Probably, I venture to say, they would have some unkind words for you, and perhaps some educational words. And to those in other countries, I would say, now what Russia is doing is a crime that should have been left in the dustbin of history with the rest of colonial imperialism. And it may sound odd for me as a Briton, a country which was rampant, to say this, but the crimes of the past do not forgive the crimes of today. And Russia is engaged in these crimes all over again. The kind of things that they have done in Ukraine and to Ukrainians are things that really ought to have been left in the dustbin of history.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, well, I'll conclude this discussion with an observation that the history of carnage, history of war, history of bloodshed is as old as history of mankind itself. But what defines you in the end is, I believe, two things define you in the end. First, speaking truth to power, and secondly, fighting for freedom. So you need to value freedom. If you've got it ever since as a birthright, you really don't realize what you've got, like so many other things. So fighting for freedom would define you, and speaking up truth to power would define you. And that's what we are doing. Thank you so very much, Theo A-Mullis.
Thank you very much, Adil. Thank you very much.